Welcome to episode 5 of the Music is Therapy podcast. Each week we ask a guest to come on and explore their favourite type of music, whether that's with a symphony, a soundtrack, a favourite album or a favourite band, and we discuss the impact music's had on their life and hopefully a bit about the emotional impact on their life. I'm looking forward to getting to this week's guest, who is Derek Watson, bass player of the Banter and also podcast host of the DW Podcast. What I'm looking forward to with this, Derek, is you're a wee bit of a different generation from myself, right?
Just a wee bit, yeah.
So your musical journey and mine are going to differ a wee bit. We have a bit of banter about this, right? But let's have a wee look, see where it started. The Banter Thieves have been on the go for quite some time, as far as I'm aware, right? So first and foremost, when did you get the band together? How long has it been on the go?
Oh geez, that's a good question. You're making me feel old. So I played a gig very recently that you were at in McCool's, and I was looking, because we're bringing out a new single next week. Say a new single, it's one that we recorded. The first time we recorded that was 15 years ago.
Was it?
And it was one of the first songs we wrote, so I reckon we've been on the go for 16, 17 years or something. Which is it's strange because that's almost half of my life. I'm 35 at the moment, so I think that I've been doing that with one band for almost as long as it's quite scary, but it's important to me because it's, I hope this ties in with the podcast, but I do it because I enjoy it, and the guys do it because they enjoy it. It's not because if it was putting stress on us or if it was making us under pressure or, it wasn't fun, we just wouldn't do it. But music means so much to us and brings out so much joy in us that it's something that we want to keep doing for as long as possible.
That's something I find quite admirable actually, right? Because you're doing it for the enjoyment of it. As you say, we were at a gig last week, sold out in McCool's, there was about 100 odd people there, and the atmosphere was still electric after 16 years, the place was bouncing. And you're not looking towards financial gain here, you're not looking towards any level of fame and fortune or anything like that, you're just simply doing it because the band's something you've done, sort of band of brothers, the guys who went to school with in the band, and it's been going that whole time.
Absolutely, and I think when you start doing things that you enjoy, that is a passion for money, you almost lose that to an extent. And I've spoke to many people in the creative industries that are maybe photographers or videographers or even people who played football, do you know what I mean? And to an extent, when they're grown up, that's the passion, that's what they look forward to every weekend, is putting their football boots on or going out and playing their guitar. And then as soon as people want to make money out of you rather than you making money, that's maybe sometimes where it loses its fun. And there's a different dynamic to it also. Now for us, if we make a wee bit of money along the way and it covers our costs, brilliant, but if we don't, it's not the motivator.
Was there ever a time when you were young and a bit more rock and roll than you were at 35, I suppose, and you thought you might go down a road of a bit more fame and fortune?
Absolutely, there was a time where, and I know we sold it last week, there was a time where we were selling out a lot of gigs across Scotland, playing across England as well, and we were probably early 20s, late teens, early 20s. There was a few people saying like, oh, this A&R scout's coming along tonight, or this person's coming to see you. And even at that level, I think it made us feel a wee bit nervous and we had a wee bit more arguments with each other and felt a wee bit added pressure, but it never really got to that stage. I remember we played a gig in King Tut's one night and a guy came along to a record label, I'll not say who he was, and a fight broke out, and I remember just looking out at the end of the gig, the boys lying on the floor with his head split on, and I just thought, this is a fucking disaster, we're never going to make it. At that point I was just thinking we should genuinely just chuck this band, there's no point in doing it at all, but here we are 15 years later or something.
I'm just laughing, that's kind of a typical Motherwell one.
There was a band that we played with, and we played with them very regularly, called the Begbies. In fact, some of your listeners are maybe Rangers fans or football fans, so maybe remember the lead singer of the Begbies was a guy called Scott Arfield. He played for Rangers and he plays for Falkirk. And we played gigs together for about 3 or 4 years, all over the place. We got on so well. But they had a really rowdy crowd, and they were off of Livingston, West Lothian way, and we had quite a rowdy crowd that were off of Lanarkshire. And I think somebody unfortunately in their crowd was quite racist to a guy that was in to see us, and it all kind of kicked off in King Tut's that night, and this boy fell and smacked his head on the stage. He just happened to be in the middle of it, or he wasn't involved, and we never heard from him ever again, so that was that.
See, back in the day, I remember going to see you when you were supporting The View in a big venue in Paisley, if I remember
right, yeah.
You had to get a few decent support slots back there as well, though, didn't you?
Absolutely, we played with The View a number of times, still quite pally with a few of the boys that are in the band. Trying to think who else we've played with lots of bands across the UK, and been lucky enough to play a few gigs over in Europe and stuff, so but I think you you can all just enjoy it when it comes, because you never know how long these things are going to last, you know.
See, for me, and I'm only looking at my perspective, if I was in your shoes, to me that is success.
100%,
Because you've done what you want to do, you've wrote some tunes, you've played them live, you've had decent support slots, you've toured about, and to me the only thing that's missing is the money. Everything else was part of that life is there, do you know what I mean?
Aye, for me, success is being happy and being able to do things with people that you're friendly with and making memories forever.
Aye.
So I mean, actually talking to The View, there's a lyric that Kel Faulkner wrote, I think it's in Superstar Tradesman, it's, I don't want money, I want a thing called happiness. I don't want cash, you know, I'd quite like memories. And for me that's like more important than anything. Don't get me wrong, people need to pay their bills and get by and survive, but memories you can't put a price on. I think gigs give that to everybody. Writing music gives that to people that write music as well, and in that regards we've been very successful. Do you know what I mean? We've got bags of tunes that even if it's 100 people or more than that or even less, if you see somebody in the crowd singing something that you've wrote back to you, or actually just jumping about and enjoying themselves at a tune that you've wrote, it feels special, do you know what I mean?
And you're fairly well known in the local area, let's be honest, you're a fairly well known band, and you've had a big impact in and around Motherwell because obviously you're a local band, but you've done quite a bit with Motherwell Football Club as well.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, the highlight for that probably would have been in 2018. Motherwell got to the League Cup final and the Scottish Cup final in 1 year, which is very much a rarity. And we re-recorded an old Motherwell song that was first released in, I say it was maybe the 60s or 70s, called Up the Well. We've kind of modernised it and brought it out.
I hadn't even heard it at the time, to be honest.
Aye. We probably should have wrote our own one, but it wouldn't have been as good. So we re-recorded that, and you know, it got top 10 in the Scottish charts, top 20 in the UK charts, and there seemed to be a real hype around the place, and it almost felt like for that week leading up to the Cup final, Motherwell might win it, and then Celtic beat us in the League Cup final and the Scottish Cup final. But for me, the highlight was, you know, playing on the pitch at Fir Park, David Cooper standing behind the goals was full, and everybody was singing this Up the Well song back, and I actually remember being stuck at the traffic lights at the Strathie Park in Motherwell like 2 days before it, and I didn't know the guy in the motor next to me, and he didn't know me. And he had the window down and he was playing that song, and I just thought, this is fucking strange, really bizarre. But there was a real hype about the place, and I think off the back of that we've been lucky that a lot of Motherwell fans and people from the local area still come and see us and still support us and still share our stuff, and you know, they're very...
Well, considering the gig you had at the weekend there was a bit of a gap between gigs really. So people could have forgot about you now, if you know what I mean, because it's been a couple of years probably before you had a gig, a year or so.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you still sold the place out in the bother whatsoever, and everybody I knew was making an effort to get to the gig. Do you know what I mean? You support the local guys again, do you know what I mean?
I think there's part of that as well. You know, people like to see, and as much as Scottish folk, you know, that you want people to stay in their stations and not get ahead of themselves. I think what we're really good at doing as a community, certainly in Lanarkshire and Scotland, is actually supporting local artists as well. And we want to see them do well and go as far as they can. So we've been very lucky in that regard as well.
I think that thing's definitely getting better. I think your generation is better than my generation.
Okay.
I think you seem to be more supportive of each other and more encouraging, and I don't know if the internet's part of that, where people are doing their stuff and it's more acceptable. But it seemed to me when I was young, anybody that poked their head above the parapet is about like, don't get above your station, son.
Yeah.
Whereas now, I mean, you're young, the crowd of guys that you're friendly with, you've got a few well-known DJs, you've podcasters, you've got bands.
But even at that, you know, and you talk about, you know, the rise of social media and TikTok and whatever, I see a lot of young guys coming through, young girls coming through that are super talented, filming themselves, promoting things and singing into their phone and all that, and I just think, I couldn't do that. And that's ingrained in you. It's almost like you're from Lanarkshire, you can't be doing that, that's not what you're meant to be doing. But nowadays you need to do that to get far, because it's so saturated. You know, anybody can create music, anybody can put it out, and it's much more open. Do you know what I mean? We could record something right now, pop it on TikTok tonight, and it could be seen by thousands of people. So to have that confidence is admirable, but it's also, for me, it's a bit daunting.
It is, and it's completely changed again from the way it was traditionally with music, where you had to put your tape or your CD in an A&R, play loads of gigs, hope people hear you, get in a magazine, build up a bit of following, get support slots, blah blah blah. Nowadays, within a week, half of Britain or the world can hear your stuff if it's promoted properly.
I listened to a podcast recently, I don't know if you've heard of the singer Luke Lavoe, who's from, he's from Bathgate, West Lothian again, brilliant Scottish singer-songwriter. He says he met with a record label a few years ago, and the first thing he said to him was, how many TikTok followers have you got? And he just thought, I'm a musician, I'm a songwriter, I'm not here to be making funny videos for the internet, but now that's the way that people look at it. And there's something sad about it, you know, for me, there's something quite...
I agree.
Quite forced.
I agree, but I think
If you want to do it, you need to do it.
it's the world we live in, and
Yeah.
there's loads of jobs out there, not just in music. If you don't promote yourself on social media, you're going nowhere.
Absolutely.
If you're a personal trainer, you've got your own business of any kind, I mean, there's guys out there who, there's a lot of better people doing the job they're doing, but they're just really good at promoting on social media.
Absolutely.
So,
and listen, that's not me taking away from people that are very good at TikTok, but often you see one person pop up and become super famous for one song through something that's went viral online through Instagram or TikTok, and then you never really see them follow something up. I know that there's boys that live in Motherwell that will probably get a catalogue of songs that are absolutely brilliant and nobody will ever hear them. So I mean, it's just their pals in their bedroom that they'll play it to. And you just think, there's something sad about that.
but even in your time, I suppose that's changed dramatically during the 16 years or so what you've been on with the social media side of things.
Absolutely.
What age were you when you actually formed the band, if you like?
I want to say it would have been 19, 20.
Just out of school type thing?
Just out of school, and it was an exciting time, but it was the same. It was like, it was all about getting radio play, or it was all about, you know, maybe getting in one of the national newspapers. You know, if the Daily Record done a review on you, Jim Gertley or something like that, you'd be absolutely buzzing. And now it's like, that doesn't really matter, because there's more folk going to see your thing on Instagram.
Aye.
Do you know what I mean?
And did you play bass before that, or did you get the bass with the intention of getting a band together?
The first band I played in was a band called Missing a Bit. And the reason we were called Missing a Bit is because the drummer was circumcised. I don't know how many people knew that at the time, and looking back on it, it's fucking embarrassing. Do you know what I mean? But now I'm like, oh my god, why did we do that? But we were wee boys. We were 14, 15, and I was the singer in that band. The drummer didn't go on to do much music. Bass player John was a lovely guy, but I don't think he does a wee bit of DJing now. His uncle was actually in Teenage Fan Club, and the guitarist at the time, Darren, went on and played in the band The La Fontaines.
Right.
Darren's super musician, really, really talented, and they've just played the last gig forever last week. But he started a new band called Glass Checks. Definitely check them out. But it was the four of us, and we were kind of in a garage band, so we practiced in my mate's garage. And I was the singer, didn't play bass at all, and then John, who played bass, left, and they were like, you're going to need to play bass, and I was thinking, oh fuck, I can't do this. So I ended up getting a bass, picked it up, and I'm still not great at it, do you know what I mean, but I can get by, and it kind of forced me into it. It was like, we want to keep doing this band, so if you want to keep doing the band, there's nobody else running about that we know that plays bass, so you're going to need to do it.
How much practice did you put in?
I put in a fair bit, to be fair. But we were young and we were at school, do you know what I mean, and it was cool at the time. I had a lot of confidence for a guy that couldn't sing, and looking back at it, I think, where did that kind of go? Do you know what I mean? Because I listened to some of those recordings of the early days, and the vocals are so bad, but at the time we thought we were on top of the world, do you know what I mean?
Well, I personally don't. I think it's a unique sound a man's got rather than be a good singer. Right, I don't think, look at Bob Dylan, can't sing a note really, but he's one of the most famous guys in the world, so I think he's probably the best example of a guy that can't sing. But you can still make great music.
I think some of the best bands in the world just frontman can't sing. Do you know what I mean? You look at a lot of the punk scene, terrible. And we were kind of punky indie stuff back then, and it worked for a while. So
were you at school through the 90s and stuff like that then?
I'm not that old.
Well, what
at primary school through the 90s.
So
fucking hell, Grandad.
Hey, excuse my bad mathematics there then, right?
Early 2000s.
Early 2000s, right?
Yeah.
So you've missed the 90s then?
Aye.
Right,
so we missed all the Britpop, Oasis, Blur, all that stuff. Like, that was probably just coming to an end when we were really getting into music. So Natalie, my wife, she's 2 years younger than me, and she's seen Oasis a few times, but it was in like, I don't know if it was the Hydro at the time or it was the SECC, do you know what I mean? It was almost when they were coming towards the end.
A wee bit.
Aye, we never got to experience that. And
I knew you liked Oasis, that's why I thought you might have been there at the time. Who was kind of your influences? Who were you obsessed with when you were young? What was it like for your generation when it came to a music scene at school?
I was really into kind of, and this is quite cringy, but I was quite into, and I still am, like American pop punk bands. So like Green Day, Blink-182, quite like bands like the Foo Fighters, who else would I been into? And then in later stages when I became a bit more indie school, I was more into bands like the Strokes, the Libertines, The View that you mentioned earlier on, the Cortinas when they started breaking through. But for me, like, favourite band ever is Blink-182.
Is it?
Aye, by a mile. And they actually started in the 90s, and then in the early 2000s when we were all at high school they really kicked off. And at the time I used to skateboard, and a lot of the guys that I used to hang about with, we used to always come out on our skateboards and listen to that kind of music. I think we probably wished we were somewhere in Florida or something, but we're deepest, darkest Lanarkshire.
See, it to me, this might be my black and white thinking about tribes and scenes and all that kind of stuff. I obviously met all you guys at the football when you were kids.
Mm-hmm.
You did have long hair at the time, but you did have long hair. But to me, it doesn't really coincide with the football thing, right? Skating and pop punk and that way you dressing and all that's kind of a different subculture to the football scene.
Oh,
Did it tie in a bit with the ultras thing you were into?
To an extent. I think, well, for those that don't know, I support Motherwell, same as yourself, so like, I feel as if at Motherwell it's maybe a bit different. Like, I feel as if you went to the football, you almost had to listen to bands like Oasis, Ocean Colour Scene, Blur, the Libertines, all that kind of stuff. Like, a lot of the boys I go to the football, like, they're into that, but they're more into, some of the boys are into Slipknot and death metal and all crazy stuff like that. Other boys are really into their rap music, blah blah blah. For me it was like, we were all pals with Motherwell, regardless of the football, you know what I mean? We were Motherwell fans, but we were into skateboarding, and the ultra thing came very naturally. You know, it wasn't like, I don't think we ever got together and thought, we're going to start an ultras group here, or we're going to be ultras. It was like, we went to the football, and then all of a sudden people were banging drums and waving flags. And
it used to develop with the ultras, I suppose. Yours existed before the ultra scene was in Scotland.
100%, yeah.
And you just developed it an ultra group then.
Aye.
And when did the Well Boys come about then?
So the first incarnation of the Well Boys was around about 05, 06. Well Boys 86 was the first name. And I remember at the time I was really into my skateboarding then. And I was like, oh, I'm really sure about this. I didn't really get it. Do you know what I mean? That, and a lot of football fans didn't get it back then. Do you know what I mean? It was like, why are folk going to football stadiums in Scotland and banging drums and waving flags and jumping about like idiots?
See, I think that all guys like me who had been into football a long time before you guys, and we'd been had our own scene, as it were, we were looking at you and going, they're not doing it right, they're not dressing like us, and they're a poor prodigy because they're not wearing their jeans the way we did, or their training shoes on the way it should be. And I had to realise, you just want to try to copy us.
But actually over time, I think that's where it probably was more appealing to me. Do you know what I mean? It was like, this is something new and it's a bit different, and it's actually quite unique, you know. And the fact that we all knew each other for school, or we knew each other for around the local area, and we went in the same trains to away games, it all kind of just fell into place naturally. And there was folk that were into the casual scene before that started getting into the ultras. There was guys that came for like that kind of skateboarding scene. There was guys that came for Lanarkshire that we didn't know, and we all came together. And I don't think there was ever this forced, you have to dress like this, or you have to be into a certain style of music. And for me that's quite important, do you know what I mean? Because I think where that casual scene and the ultra scene is originally quite similar is it pushed individualism. Do you know what I mean? When you were growing up, it was all about who can be the best dressed, who can have the jacket or the trainers that everybody else doesn't have. And I think the origins of the ultra scene back in Italy was very much like that. If you look at it the way it's developed over the years now, it's like everybody wearing the same black jacket and everybody kitted out in the same balaclavas. And that's because over the years it's developed to a level that I never thought it would get to, certainly here and across Europe. But the police presence is a lot heavier, and there's a misconception often of what people that are involved in that scene are up to. And listen, there is people that will push the boundaries and go far, but I think people want to protect their identity to a certain extent. Whereas when we were starting out and when you were involved in the stuff that you were doing at the football, it was very much about standing out for the crowd. And that's kind of changed a wee bit, and for me I wish it hadn't. You know, I wish that folks still turned up and were, you know, they all had their own gear on and they looked different. And I think when you, for example, you look over at the Italian scene, it's a bit more like that, but the German scene and the Swiss scene over in the Netherlands and stuff, it's everybody's wearing the exact same gear. And I think that's a bit boring. You know, it's not really...
Doing it the same pair of trainers and stuff, we'll just head to toe in black.
Absolutely. Yeah.
See, I would say I thought I knew quite a bit about the ultra scene, having been to football in Europe quite a bit. But I just read that Tobias Jones book we were talking about ultras, and it was a bit an eye-opener for me.
Absolutely.
Because he talks back, when did it start off? In the 70s?
Oh,
in
70s, 80s, aye.
In the 70s, and it talks about how it was a subculture, and it was about the people in society that were really on the outskirts coming together to support the club, and it was like one love for this club, and it was the guys who came from a real underclass, really.
And to go back to music in a way, for me, and I don't think guys of your generation will fully appreciate this or even agree with me, but I see the ultra scene now in Scotland as probably one of the biggest subcultures in the UK since maybe the casuals or the mods or the punk scene. Because what else do you see young working class people doing at the moment? you know what I mean? A lot of them we're becoming a world that's more alienated, you know, people are getting in themselves. A lot of young guys are spending a lot of time in their bedrooms or in their houses playing computer games, etc. This gives people an outlet. I mean, where else would you get essentially 30 or 40 guys on a Tuesday, Wednesday and Thursday night doing what's a glorified art class and then displaying their art at the weekend to a stadium of thousands of people?
And what I like about that, just as an outsider looking in, really, I love the art they do at the game, but I also like the graffiti murals they do throughout the town, because it's art, it's not just graffiti for the sake of it.
And I think there's a lot of people that want to put it down and they want to say this is just mindless idiots, this is just young guys that are, you know, the next extension of hooligans. But the reality is, it's people that have got a sense of pride and belonging, they've got a sense of pride in their community, they want to put back into their community, they're doing a lot of charitable work, they're giving young guys that maybe don't have much of a purpose, you know, and it's bringing people out of their homes, it's bringing people together. And I think, not to get too political, but for me there's been a removal of the social fabric of society over a number of decades now by consecutive governments. I'm not going to say the Labour Party or the Tories, you know, they're both as bad as each other when they've been in power. But you've stripped away community centres, you've stripped away youth clubs. You know, how often do you get young boys at high school going swimming in the summer? You know, they've took away all these opportunities for kids. And what this does is it gives people a place to come together, and it gives people a voice, and it gives people a collective voice, and I think that's really, really important.
And a bit of a sense of self of who they are, being part of something, definitely.
And for me, it also brings out people's talents. And you know, when I look at, now we're kind of the older guys that go to the football to a certain extent, and there's guys that I look around and I think, you've learned a lot for actually being part of this over the last 15 years. And there's some people that have maybe went on to jobs that they wouldn't have had if they hadn't learned skills that they've picked up, been involved in that, be that, you know, graphic design or writing or something along those lines. So
and there's a few guys into the union in their work now because of the political side of things, and I know you guys you've done a lot of stuff with the food banks and stuff like that in the community as well, and even the guys my age done a big toy run last Christmas time and stuff like that.
Absolutely.
Which probably wouldn't have happened before, by the way.
No, not at all.
Which is probably an influence you've had on us subconsciously. The guys my age clubbed together, got a lot of toys, took it down various hospitals and stuff like that, and we didn't really do stuff like that before. Everything was about making £1 for yourself in our day. Do you know what I mean? If you were selling t-shirts, it was for profit.
And I think what's important is, you know, if you talk about mental health and the stuff that you talk about in this podcast over the last few weeks, what the football stuff's done as well is it's allowed us to speak to our peers. So over the years we've had people that have unfortunately taken their own lives through suicide. We've then, off the back of that, had, you know, suicide awareness sessions that we've run in conjunction with the football club or the community trust at the football club. And it's easier to get someone along to something if it's tied to the football club. If I just say to my pals, oh listen, see you on Thursday night, we're all having a mental health night, these want to come down, they'll be a bit like, oh, what's that all about? But if you have it at the football club and you have the brand in there, you might get people along that, you know, they're used to going to Fir Park or they're used to going to Celtic Park or Ibrox or whatever, and it feels like a comfortable space for them, and then they might start to open up as well. So it's given us an opportunity to do things like that, and I believe better our community. And listen, there'll be times where they don't better their community, you know, and they want to have pyrotechnics and piss people off or do graffiti in areas where folk don't like it, or even to some extent there'll be some lads that go out there and get involved in violence on a Saturday, you know. But
see, young men, boys will be boys, and I don't think they're ever going to be able to eradicate that and get guys to behave perfectly.
But there's very much a positive influence that can come out of it, and I think people need to focus a lot more on that than they do the negatives.
And back to the music thing you're talking about, see, I used to really love the Stone Roses and Oasis when I was young as well. And do you know the reason I don't particularly like them? It's just because the whole cliche thing at football. If you're into football, you need to wear Stone Islands, you need to wear Adidas, you need to love the Stone Roses, you need to love Oasis, you need, do you know what I mean? And it was a bit like, oh my god, man, this is becoming so cliched, and I just get sick of the whole thing.
I do love the Stone Roses, I absolutely love them, but I didn't really love them when I was growing up. And I think that was maybe part of me becoming more interested in football and this kind of fan culture, that there was guys that I was pals with that I've listened to the Stone Roses for years and I hadn't. And then for me that was a bit new, and I was like, this is really exciting, but I don't like the cliches. I do agree with you in that. I think it's very much like Clone Roses or...
It is. Guys with the lemon tattoos everywhere and all that kind of stuff.
I went to see Liam Gallagher at the Bars a few years ago, and I think Liam Gallagher's brilliant, but just have to with the same coats on, with the same haircut, and there's just something a bit naff about it, isn't there?
Well, it's took that individualism and made it a uniform. It's people back in the day would spend X amount of money on clothes and they were hard to get. And they would have a particular individual look, and it was about one-upmanship, where nowadays it's just a uniform data. So that kind of jacket, that kind of shoes, get that haircut, you'll fit in with that group there.
Absolutely.
and it's kind of became a bit boring in that respect, I suppose.
Absolutely.
So, in relation to your music journey, when you were in this pop punk stuff, you've got into it, would you say you are the last generation to have any kind of scene like that though? Like, to my knowledge, since then, it's not really evolving in any way.
But you know what I think that is? I think that's us getting old. Right, because I've said that to a few people recently as well, and when I actually think about it, what I do think is sad is I look at young guys particularly that are growing up just now, and when they go to the football and the bands that they're still into are bands that yous were into years ago in the 90s, or your Oasis, Kasabian example, maybe even Arctic Monkeys, and I think
Smiths.
what's coming through for them. But I think dance music's evolved massively. I think, you know, it's not something that I've ever been into, but I think techno scene's another level just now, especially across Europe. I think there's lots of amazing singer-songwriters coming through in Scotland that maybe just aren't connected to that kind of lad culture. Does that make sense? I strongly believe that the Scottish music scene's never been better. I think that there's, you know, the British music scene's thriving as well. I just think it's become really diluted in the fact that it's really easy to access music now. So it's hard to really set those apart that are special.
Back to the dance scene, I think the nightclub culture thing's dying down a bit, right? There's not as many clubs out there as there was in any city. But I think big events are becoming a major thing.
Yeah.
So people are like, young people maybe once a month to go to some.
Absolutely.
It's a big event, be memorable for them. It's at the Hydro, it's at SWG3, wherever it might be, and they go to an event and that's their memories. Whereas when you were young, nightclubs were on 4 times a week. There was 3 or 4 in Hamilton, there was a couple in Motherwell, there was 1,000 in Glasgow.
But I wonder if that's why these younger generations aren't evolving, or music isn't evolving in the way that it used to, because if you remove these places that are inspiring folk, you know, and or you outprice people for the game, how can you really inspire creativity? Do you know what I mean? So like, I think about that all the time. When I was a young boy, I used to go to gigs, and we're talking about that kind of pop punk scene. I remember going to gigs 3-4 times a week, and I could get that out of my pocket money, or I'd maybe do a wee bit of work around the house, or cut my auntie's grass or something. Do you know what I mean? That would give you enough money to go. See now, I can't afford, and I work full time. I can't afford to go to gigs once a week. Never mind 3 or 4 times a week.
Ticket prices are so expensive nowadays, but and again, it's because they don't sell records or CDs to the same level.
Yeah.
The bands have got to get their money from somewhere, so a band you would have went to see 20 years ago for 20 quid, it's now 85 quid.
And there's something sad about that, because you want people to come through and you want the next Paul Wellers or No Gallagher's or whatever, but you're not going to get that if it's not accessible. And I think that's reflective across the board as well. I think, and I know we keep talking about football, but I think if you look at some of this is maybe a stupid statement, right, and you might disagree with me. I think if you look at some of the football players that are coming through now, if you look at all the best Scottish players, they tend to be people from middle class backgrounds. I think the best example is Andy Robertson, who's the captain of Scotland, won the Champions League at Liverpool. When I was growing up, it was all the boys from working class council schemes that were the best at football. But now it's like, you can't play football in the park. There's all these no ball game signs. You need to be able to get your parents to drive you about from training centre to training centre, or you need to be able to pay to play in AstroTurf pitches. And it seems to there's been a real shift for the boys that used to play down the pitch with their mates, or play out in the streets against the garages or whatever. That's kind of disappeared. You don't see it anymore. And I think if you look at the national team, Scotland for example, when you look at a lot of teams across the country, it tends to be boys from middle class to upper class areas that are really thriving. And I think music's the exact same. I don't think it's accessible anymore. I don't think it's affordable to go to. I think it's more expensive to buy instruments. It's more expensive to record now, and you're not making money out of it. So see, if you're not making money out of it, you need to chuck it. It's only the folk now that are in a lot of creative industries that their parents can afford to fund their lifestyle until they get to a certain stage where they're actually able to make it.
It's a sometimes leaving paying for itself.
Aye, and a lot of folk from working class areas don't have that luxury where their parents can say, you're just working this for 3 years and you can stay with us and you don't need to pay any bills.
And even the pub culture, a lot of pubs shutting down and pubs not being attended. So back in the day, you could sit together in a local pub, we've got a band, can we play on Thursday night? He's happy, gets more guys in, having a drink, he gets a bit more money and it gets the community buzzing a bit.
Absolutely.
That's not really there any longer, aye.
Totally gone, aye.
And I think some of these scenes, like the pub rock scene in London at one point in time, sparked off every new wave band, every mod revival band, every scene came out of pub rock, and I think it came for that and built its way up from small venues to bigger ones. Whereas now I suppose you're also getting bands competing to get slots to play in bigger venues straight away, the support slots to get to get a bit of exposure to their audience.
And what I've seen as well is the music industry's changed so much that maybe back in the day when we were growing up, and I think probably when you were growing up, bands used to take their pals on tour. And see now, I've heard a lot of it, it's like, we'll know a band that's playing the Barras and they'll be like, any chance we can play with you, support you? We've never played the Barras, it's the only place in Glasgow we've not played, desperate to play it, bucket list stuff. I would love to, but actually the booking agent says we have to put on somebody for the label, or we have to put on somebody for the same roster, you know, and everybody's competing for this thing, and there's no the same camaraderie, there's no the same helping each other up the ladder, and that's because those at the top are saying, nah, it's not happening. Do you know what I mean? So I think that there was a good example for Lanark when you used to have like the Soup Dragons, Teenage Fan Club, all that kind of scene, Vaseline's, where they're all playing together, you used to go everywhere together, and now it's like, nah, you'll usually see a band from Glasgow supported by a band from Manchester, supported by a band from Luton or somewhere like that, because the music industry's pushing their bands. They don't want their pals playing because they're not going to make any money out of it.
I think the Bell Sound bands you're talking about back in the day were actually intertwined around, some of them played in each other's bands at times and stuff like that. Which again, for a town the size of Bellshill,
amazing.
And in the 80s, I remember back in the day there was a programme on TV called the Bellshill Beat, and it was showing these bands that were coming through for a 4 mile radius off the Bellshill area, and they were all very well known, well regarded in the indie scene, one of them being Kurt Cobain's favourite band.
BMX Bandits?
No, it was the Vaselines.
Vaselines.
And they're still, the BMX Bandits are still playing the now, and Teenage Fan Club are still playing the now. All these guys will be in their late 50s now, do you know what I mean?
I think there's a bit of nostalgia there as well. And I think there's probably these bands that maybe faded away for a while, but people that went and watched them, a lot of them maybe have had kids, and their kids are now growing up, and they've maybe got a bit more free time. So you see a lot of bands from maybe the 80s or 90s or 70s and 80s coming back and selling at all these venues again. It's probably because these folk have grown up and they're like, right, we're ready to go back out again. We want to relive our youth, you know.
The old midlife crisis kicking in.
I never said that.
Right, so you spoke a bit about Blink 182, right? What I want to talk about now is, usually we ask someone to bring their favourite album along. We talk about that album, right? What the emotional connection is for you, time in your life it was significant, what it means. You're the first guy to know broke one, right?
You asked me to bring a record. I'm the youngest guy to be on so far.
First of all, I want to talk about why you don't own any records or CDs, right?
Do you know, it's interesting you say that, because I was talking to my wife the other week and I was like, we really need to get a record player for the house. And she's like, they cost a fortune. What's the point in getting their records and then there's 30-40 quid a pop? Just fire your Spotify on the speaker. And I was like, I get it, but there's nothing purer than putting the record on and putting it and just hitting spin or whatever, but it's just not what my generation done growing up. I've never really experienced that. I mean, my first experience was taping things off the radio. So like a tune would come on the radio and you'd hit the 2 buttons to try and record it, and then you'd hit it to stop it, and you'd try and not get the adverts in between and all that. I don't know if you
we did that.
If you've done that.
We did that.
But then my really earliest days that I remember going on school trips and stuff, we had like Sony Walkmans almost, and you just put the CD in and took it away with you. But like it couldn't bounce or it would skip and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, the big booklet with all your CDs in and outside the cases to take hold of it. You had to choose your albums carefully because you were going to rinse these albums for the next week or whatever.
Aye, but I never grew up with records really. I remember my mum and dad having records when I was a wee boy, and then my mum still had loads of records in the cupboard. I think she probably still does. There's loads of records in the cupboard, but she's not got a record player anymore. And it's probably stuff that I wouldn't really listen to.
But see, you made a good point there. I find this a lot, right, where there's loads of people, record buying generation, shall we say, right, my age and older and stuff like that. And I used to have a fairly decent record collection 15, 20 years ago when a lot of people weren't into it really. And the amount of people say to me, oh, I've got loads in my loft, or I've got loads at my mum's bit, or I've got loads in the garage, and I would be like, go maybe have a look at them, and they'd be like, no way, you take my records. And I'd be, you've not played them for 20 years, you don't have a record player, let me look at them. And they'd such an emotional attachment to these records, they would never give them away.
Aye.
And I always find that's missing now.
It's massively missing. I used to remember if a new album was coming out, we used to go to Virgin Megastore at the top of Buchanan Street and buy that out of there. And if it was like a popular one, you'd maybe have to queue up and make sure that they had the barriers out to make sure it was like the airport, single file and all that. You'd go through and get them, and I remember that, and there was a bit of buzz about it, and it was, we spoke about this earlier before we recorded, like same at Ticket Scotland under Central Bridge. If you wanted a gig ticket, you had to go and queue up, or even Teenie Park, folk camped out the night before to try and get these tickets. And there was a real buzz about it now, and my favourite album, so you mentioned Blink 182, My favourite album is probably Enema of the State, which came out, I want to say 96, 97. And I remember listening to that for the first time and listening to it all the way through. And as soon as it finished, just starting it again, and then doing the same again, doing the same again. They must have done this for months, still do it nowadays. But now it's so hard to get people to listen to an album all the way through because it's on Spotify or it's on some sort of electronic thing. So people will release singles or not even release albums. And the record companies and the music industry will push you towards releasing singles or maybe like an EP because it costs less, and they're not making as much money out of them. And I think that's really sad as well because I used to love getting home, opening up the CD, looking at the booklet inside. Sometimes they had all the lyrics on them or the wee photos and all that. And that's all gone as well. You don't get the album artwork to the same extent as well.
See, I think buying the album, say if you recommend me a band to do, I could download a couple of tunes, or I hear a song I like, I could download that one tune, check another couple out, which is convenient, and it's maybe a good way to check a band out, dip your toe in, then get their album, right? Whereas if you had the album and you went and bought it, you valued it more, and you would listen from start to finish, and you would get to know every track. And what you tend to do is you would listen to stuff where the 3 or 4 singles off it are your big hitters to start with. But eventually you get bored of the ones because they're on the radio and all that stuff, and then there's album tracks that become your favourites. So and then you've got stuff, and I think you get to know the band better.
And I think it's making live gigs worse because folk now are just often waiting for the big hit. And I don't feel as if you're going to a gig and the fact that folk are the massive fans probably don't know a lot of the album tracks. If there even is album tracks, and we'll hear folk talking in between songs and all that, and I just don't get it. But I'm a happy critic because I can't remember the last time I bought an album. I've no idea the last time I bought an album.
See, because it's probably ingrained in me a wee bit, I like listening to certain artists in album format. Some albums are concept albums, they're supposed to be listened to like that. I'd never listen to one Pink Floyd song, for example. I'd always listen to a Pink Floyd album. What's Going On, Marvin Gaye, again, for me, is a bit of a concept album. You want to listen to start to finish and it starts kind of vibe. There's other stuff I will make up playlists. But I think, I don't know, see what I liked about that? I like growing up with a band and you had the first album, and you binge that album. You got the second album, binge that album. You got your third album, and blah blah blah. And you could talk about that band 10 years later, and you just knew for a moment in time that was on the first album, that was the second one, no, that was on the third.
You've no clue. It merges into one.
And it just merges now into these great hit stuff playlists. Like I don't know what album it's all for, I don't know where it came out, and I think that's gone now. I think you go to one album you grew up with, a band a bit better then.
One of my favourite albums away from that, which is probably a genre that I've not been massively into, is The Streets, A Grand Don't Come For Free. I love original Pirate Material, first album, but A Grand Don't Come For Free for me was amazing. I thought it was incredible. And each song, I don't know if you've listened to it, but each song goes into the next. So it's a story that he tells throughout the whole album, and they all merge into each other and it all makes sense. And if you listen to them individually, they're still good tunes. But when you hear that collective piece of work, it's like, that is so clever. And you just don't get it. You'll never get that anywhere. It's lost.
Quadrophenia, the original Quadrophenia album is very like that as well. It's a concept album, it's very much like that. But I think it sets the scene better. So when you're making an effort to listen to it, it sets the scene better and puts you in that vibe rather than just grabbing one song for it. It's a better art form, and that's what I think. Some art is meant to be shown in that way, and you're only seeing a snippet if you're doing it the other way. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, and I think the quality's lost as well because everybody's listening to things through telephones or listening to things through wireless headphones and whatever, and you don't hear as much. If you're listening to a good pair of headphones or a stereo or something, the quality is much better.
Well, I remember when CDs came out, they made out CDs would be the best sound quality, man, you couldn't damage these discs. It was a lot of nonsense, right? You're always going to get a better sound off a record on a top stereo. Any crap stereo is going to be a crap sound, but if you get a top quality stereo with a bit of vinyl, it's going to be much, much better.
It's went 360, isn't it? Like record sales are more popular than they've ever been since you were young or whatever, and I think people are appreciating the slower form of art more, if that makes sense.
It might be having an upsurge with young people. It might be cool now as well. Things go through fashions where it's cool to buy records, and hopefully it won't.
I think people are just slowing down a wee bit. Like a lot of my pals have started getting into photography and analogue photography and old cameras for the 70s and 80s, and it's like, I can't imagine any of us ever been into that, and now you're waiting a week to get your photos back or whatever. But I think people are realising it's not always the newest thing isn't always the best thing. Do you know what I mean?
Technology is definitely always a good thing. I totally agree there.
Yeah.
What I hear about young people call records vinyls, with an S at the end, vinyls, they talk about it's vinyl.
I'm guilty.
It's vinyl, it's no vinyls.
A personal dig there.
It's a personal thing for anybody who's my age. I think it's vinyl.
Right.
Do you know what I mean?
Right.
And Lloyd, do you get any vinyls? No, it's vinyl, mate. It's vinyl.
But if it's plural, if you've got more than
No,
one.
it doesn't matter, mate. It doesn't matter. Right, so this album of Blink-182, is this one of the ones that you queued up to get back in the day?
No, because it was it had been out for a few years before I got really into them.
What was it?
Aye, and I don't know why I thought it was so special. So the biggest tracks on it you probably have heard is What's My Age Again, All the Small Things. All the Small Things went massive, and that was round about the time MTV was really getting big on the scene, and they had all these kind of wacky music videos. So I think in the All the Small Things video, who was it they mocked? They done like the Backstreet Boys video in NSYNC, and they were pretending they were them, and it kind of went pretty viral before viral was a thing, so it went really big on MTV. The other one was What's My Age Again. They were running down Californian boulevards in LA like totally butt naked. That sounded like Blink-182 American, they were butt naked, I shouldn't have said that. But running a bit naked, and I think at the time it was quite, well, that's quite edgy, that's quite daft. Do you know what I mean? And for a wee boy at that time, I probably thought, oh, they're really cool. And they weren't really, they were just skater boys from San Diego. But for me at the time, it fitted in with what we were doing. Do you know what I mean? It was also at the time where Jackass was becoming quite a big thing on MTV. So it was like all these pranks and skateboarding and almost like a youthful experience of not really giving a fuck.
It's your era of rebellion. Every youthful culture has a bit of rebellion attached to it.
Absolutely.
Regardless of whether the previous generation's done it before or not. To me, look at pop punk, the name itself tells you that it's a watered down version of punk. And that's fine, I'm not criticising it. I'm not criticising it. But if I look at punk when I was young, punk to me did seem rebellious. I remember the sort of original punks were a bit older than me, and I thought they were quite scary when I was young, and mohawks and tartan bondage trousers and spray paint on their jacket and all that. I thought they was a kid looking at these guys, they were quite scary. Yeah. So I suppose that was a similar vibe to them. It's a bit like, I always compare it to Elvis, right? Looking back, people thought Elvis was rock and roll and it was dead rebellious, but I don't see Elvis like that, because in my generation, he's the kind of thing your dad listens to. And
for Blink-182, it was like, all the gigs they played, not on the live albums, it was all like stupid dick jokes and immature, spats at each other and whatever, and it was, for us it was probably like, oh, that's quite edgy, or it's quite silly, and it was fun. And similarly as well, I suppose it was kind of like a bit of rebellion. I remember my hair all spiked up and dyed red in different colours and all that, and my mum was always moaning about it, but I was kind of a bit more lenient. He took me to get my lip pierced, and my mum was furious about it, and all that kind of stuff, and it was just a bit of trying to think a wee bit outside the box.
What would you say the album's got such a special place in your heart then?
Because I think it's when I started picking up bass guitar, a lot of these songs were quite easy to learn, and they were all quite catchy, and my favourite bass guitarist was Mark Hoppus, and still is to this day his bass player in Blink, and I feel like I've just kind of grew up on that journey with him, and I'm actually just reading his memoir just now, Mark Hoppus's book, which is really, really good as well, and it's interesting to see the way that they've developed over the years. So like for folk that maybe aren't really into them might not know, but Tom DeLonge, who's the guitarist, singer, songwriter, went on to basically look into UFOs. He's done a lot of work with the US government on other life that may be out there. You've got Travis Barker, who's the drummer, which I would argue is the best drummer of all time. I genuinely am not just saying that because they're my favourite band, but he's went across so many different genres, played with so many different artists, especially massive rap artists. And now he's married, unfortunately, to one of the Kardashians.
Is he?
Do you know what I mean? So it's like A-list celebrity, then Mark Hoppus just kind of kept doing what he's doing, and superstar as well in his own right. So.
The only thing I know about Travis Barker is he's heavily tattooed.
Yes,
I'm a fan of the tattoos, and I know he was in a plane or a helicopter crash.
He was in a plane crash, nearly died. Came out the other side of it as well.
They don't get half his body covered in burns and had to get all tattoos again, nearly his whole body again.
Absolutely, they never thought he was going to survive. They said he'd never play drums again and all that, and then went on to produce quite a lot of rap artists and stuff.
See, I've got a bit of theory about some of that stuff. Like you're saying, Blink-182, your reason for being it is it's your formative years. the first introduction to real music, you're getting involved in a scene. Now you're a grown man, you're a father, etc., and they're still your favourite band. I think most people's favourite band is the one that grabs them by the throat when they're at a certain age. Right? I think that's most people's done it. We went to see Jam, which was a 90s thing, first thing I got into at school, and nobody's ever beat them. For my other bands I really enjoy, there's other types of music I really enjoy.
But it's a time and a place, isn't it? It takes you back to that time and place. And even when they bring out new music, you enjoy it, but you don't enjoy it as much as those early albums that remind you whatever you were doing at that time.
And it's a bit of nostalgia, it's always going to have that nostalgic element. I think there's some about people, but we're very nostalgic by nature.
Aye, but what's funny is you see that, and it's probably the same for you. I remember going to like pop punk gigs or punk gigs, and when I was in my teenage years and folk were crowd surfing and jumping about and it was mental. And I went to see Blink-182 at the Hydro last year, and we were right in the front, and everybody was just standing about like old guys. It wasn't cool anymore. Do you know what I mean? Like, we used to think they were the coolest band ever. It was like just all these guys you could tell just worked in finance, or that was their weekend, you know what I mean? And they were thinking they were fucking dead cool with old band t-shirts or something. I was thinking, it's not quite get the same.
Was the sound a big influence on the Banter Thief sound?
I know. I think ours sounds a bit more indie, but I think there's a bit of a punk theme comes through it. Keith is the singer, big Blink fan. Daz the drummer is
he's far out of him. He must have been.
He was mad into it. He's tattooed head to toe as well. Big influence probably Travis. Aaron, who plays guitar, is into Blink, but he's a big Green Day fan. So I suppose there's probably quite a lot of punk influences in there. Probably equally is inspired by Libertines. I think when we were first started writing songs and stuff, the Libertines were massive. Really into the Strokes as well. Dave, who used to be in the band with us, was really into the Beatles, but I don't think there's much Beatles influence in there, to be fair.
And you've spoken a bit about new music. Have you still got your finger on the pulse? Do you still know what's hot and what's not out there?
I'd like to think I know a wee bit, but I'm definitely not as clued up as I used to be. I've got a wee sister who's 21, and sometimes she'll speak to me about music and I'll think, I've not got a clue who that is. But I try and keep my finger on the pulse, and I always try and go and see young bands that are coming through as well, you know, the next generation, and try and support local artists. So.
The good thing with that is you're still getting to see bands in King Tut's and Stereo and smaller venues in Glasgow where it's still a bit more an intimate affair rather than having to go to the Hydro £100 ahead every time you go. Do you know what I mean?
I much prefer going to gigs like that. Do you know what I mean? I think there's people that, and this has maybe changed over the years as well because gigs are more expensive, but I think there's a lot of people that if they've not heard of a band won't go to see a band. And for me it's the opposite. I'd be like, I'm probably more excited about going to see a band that I've not heard. And then you might come away disappointed and you might come away buzzing, but it's like something nice about walking into the unknown.
Some of my finest memories of going to gigs are seeing big bands now. We were talking about Ocean Colour Scene before we started recording. We went to see Ocean Colour Scene in the Stuart Hotel Music Bride in a nightclub called Crystals in about 95, 96. And we only heard that the band that kind of backed up Paul Weller was playing Music Bride will go. I've still got the tickets, I think it was $4.50 a ticket. And they were playing up there, we got to see them in between the gig and being sold out. They done the tour on TFI Friday. Right. So the band kind of catapulted and there was a queue right around the whole East Kilbride trying to get this gig. And I just always remember how memorable that was, watching this band playing on a dance floor, they stage, playing their tunes, and then years later I'm seeing them at Stirling Castle, and I remember when yous were man, and I've watched yous grow up. That was just a great experience.
I love that. I went and seen, went to Transmit 2 years ago, I think it was. I seen a band called the Royston Club who were playing on just a wee riverside tent to about 100, 200 people.
Did they come for Royston by any chance?
They come for Wrexham.
Did they?
Come for Wrexham, aye, and I'd never heard any of their songs, and I just came away from it thinking yous were fucking brilliant. I loved it, and then played the QMU just a few months ago. We went to that, and it was like, I don't know what that holds, maybe like 1,000 or something. And now they're selling it bigger gigs, and it's like, it's just great to see that happening. Went to see Kneecap 3 or 4 years ago now in the garage. It was really busy, but it was the garage, a tiny venue, and probably wouldn't go and see them in Glasgow now. But I reckon their next gig in Glasgow will probably be the Hydro. Do you know what I mean? They sold out the Bars twice in a row, and it's like, to see bands still doing that journey, when it's a lot harder for bands to break through, I would say nowadays, is amazing.
Kneecap sold the kind of the my radar in the last year or so probably. They seem to have catapulted really quickly.
We've seen this stuff at Coachella in the last week, and you know, a very political stance, obviously talking about Palestine and Israel and stuff, and I think that it's genuine and it comes from a place of lived experience to a certain extent, but I think that as well, in a backdrop of what's going on in America just now, they've been very openly political and been divisive to a certain extent, only puts them in the headlines even more. And there's obviously people that will never go on that journey for that very reason, but there's 50% of the population that will go the other way.
And there is an element of them that's kind of rock and roll in the respect they don't give a fuck, they just do what they want to do and that's it, they don't care about censorship or whatever, they're going to say what they want to say.
I think that's really
That's
refreshing.
admirable, definitely. But I think what they've done quite cleverly, social media wise, I think their film was a big help to promote them. Because people were saying, have you seen that Kneecap film? No realising it was a real band, they just thought it was a film.
Right.
And then we tied the two together and realised it was a bit of
I just think it's crazy that they're playing massive sets at Coachella, that their films went massive all over the internet, and I mean I think there's more to it for me as well, because you can look at it as just a young, you know, rap group for West Belfast, but they're doing so much culturally to teach people about the Irish language. Do you know what I mean? And I've seen that there's a lot more interest in schools over in Ireland about, you know, wanting to learn Gaelic or Gaelic, and I think that we're probably quite far behind here in Scotland, that there's the trad scene in Scotland's massive and getting bigger and bigger each year, but there's not really been a band that's made folk think, what about Scots dialect, you know, how are people going to start speaking that, or how do we bring that back into the education system? It's not happening. So I actually think the impact that they've had in that respect is...
See, I think it's sad that the language would die out, right, but again, I don't see the point of speaking in the other hands, do you know what I mean? Because there is a Gaelic school in the West End of Glasgow, I believe, and it's quite sad because we don't really have that same, I don't know.
But technically the way that we're speaking just now is Scots. It's a form of Scots, right? And people would tell you, you shouldn't speak like that. You know, if you go back to high school, they'll tell you to pronounce it, they'll tell you to speak in a certain way, and I think there's something really sad about that, and I think actually the stuff that Kneecap's doing is allowing people to celebrate who they are and for where they're from, and you might not agree with that, you might have different political views or whatever, but I think everybody should have that availability to be who they want to be and to represent the communities that they're from. And I think music gives people an opportunity to do that. I think football on the altar scene gives people an opportunity to do that. And I think it's just important that, you know, folk can express a desire to be proud of where they're from and proud of their culture and heritage.
And celebrate your working class roots. There's not many being working class, there's something to be proud of, something to be an achievement. And what I really love about Motherwell and the whole thing is, I love the whole community about Motherwell. I love the fact that I know guys that are older than me and I've known them since I was at school. I know loads of guys your generation, I know some of the younger guys are on now, and I just love the whole feeling everybody's together. I don't think, me personally, I could support a club with 50,000 fans because it's not got the same feel for me.
I think that's really important, and I think what these spaces do is they bring people together for different backgrounds, you know what I mean? And I think certainly Motherwell's a good example of that. It doesn't matter if you're working class, middle class, upper class, whatever, as soon as you go into Fair Park on a Saturday, everybody's together.
Yeah.
And you probably get that at football clubs all across the land. I think that's really, really important.
What's the plans for the Banter.This going forward then? What can we expect here?
I think I mentioned this earlier, we'll get some new music coming out this year, so next couple of weeks we will have a new single out, which is a re-recording of an old single which never really got properly released.
And what's it called?
Sly Tinnies.
Sly Tinnies sounds familiar.
Sly Tinnies, so those that have came and seen us will definitely know the tune. It's about, again when we were young, we were gunned into Braehead on the bus for Buchanan Street to watch the Masters football. And we had loads of cans of Tennants, and we were drinking these in a double-decker bus, and the guy came up and said, "You can't drink this in this bus." What are you going to do? And he's like, "I'm going to get the supervisor." So the chorus is, "Drinking Sly Tinnies, a double-decker bus. I'll get the supervisor, son, if you've not paid enough." Because we'd bought kids' tickets, and then we were drinking on the bus, so we should have bought adults' tickets. So that's coming out, playing Cabaret Voltaire in Edinburgh in the middle of May, and hopefully some new tunes that we've got in the bag but no finished recording yet, come out towards the end of the year, and potentially doing a few gigs in Europe towards the end of the year as well. So,
see the writing process, how do you find it now as an adult, as it were? Because prior, see when I'm writing stuff myself, I don't mean music, if I write stuff, I always do it in a nostalgic sense. I'm always writing the 90s or the 80s or when I was growing up in the times. I find it difficult to write in the here and now. Do you find that the same when it comes to music?
No, I think we've always kind of took our surroundings and the people that we spend time with as an inspiration. We've never really thought about the past. Well, I suppose we thought about the past to an extent, but we always use that as a means to push forward, if that makes sense. I think where we're probably behind other bands is we only really write if we're in the studio or the practice space together, whereas a lot of other bands will, with technology you've got now, fire something down, send it to each other, which drink this, blah blah blah. Our creative spark probably comes when we're all together and we push each other as much as we possibly can.
Any other projects on the go? DW Podcast, does that make a comeback? Motherwell Makes Music, the festival you done before, any of that happening again?
Putting a lot of pressure on me. If my wife listens to this, she'll be telling me that I've got a 3-month-old baby and I have to slow down, so I'll not say anything publicly just yet.
Right, well listen, thanks very much for coming on. It was a pleasure. It was great chatting to you, Derek. So, right.
Thank
you
you
very much, Derek.
Cheers.
Much appreciated, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks guys, we'll be here again next week.
Is that all right?
Time enough.